Okay, we are live. I wish you a good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. It's a great pleasure to open this roundtable discussion as part of the International Forum of Global South Studies. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the virtual audience for joining us and to our researchers of their availability. My name is Ariane Holzbach, and I have the honor of moderating today's conversation titled Brazilippines Dialogues Between Latin America and Southeast Asia. This roundtable is inspired by the recent and spontaneous cultural phenomenon, the term Brazilippines, which emerged as a viral online trend between young Brazilians and Filipinos. This exchange quickly revealed unexpected cultural affinities and similar ways of navigating structural precariousness. To guide us through this reflection, we are privileged to welcome our cousins researchers, Sofia Cerezo, Kelly Agra, and Rowena Azada Palacios. Our dynamic will be as follows. Each discussion will have about 15 to 20 minutes for their initial intervention addressing the proposed thematic axis. Following the presentations, we will open a round of dialogue among the participants. We work as a communication specialist for the PEDMEA program under Brazil's Ministry of Education. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the Federal University of Ouro Preto and a technical degree in administration from Sebrae. And her reflection is entitled Brazilippines, the Colonial Perspectives in the Shared Experiences Between Brazil and the Philippines. Sophia, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my slides. Mm, yes. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I cannot see you guys. Wait.
Everything is fine, Sophia. We can see you.
Okay. So hi everyone. I'm happy to be here with Kelly, Rowena, and Ariane. And I'll talk about the Brazilippines phenomenon on social media. So, what is this Brazilippines thing about, right? Um, well, uh, if we could teleport from Brazil to the other side of the planet, we would probably land in the Philippines. Um, and even though about 20,000 kilometers separate the two countries, during the 2024 Summer Olympics, Filipinos and Brazilians came together on social media, especially on X, Twitter by then, to cheer as an extended family for athletes from both nations. It started after a Brazilian user on Twitter posted celebrating Filipino gymnast Carlos Yulos' gold medal in the men's floor final. It was August 3rd, and the post said, in Portuguese, but I'm translating it, a Filipino won a gold medal, and that's gold for Brazil too, because we are cousins. And after that, Filipino users started commenting and sharing the post, even though it was written in Portuguese. Well, after that, Filipino user said, "We love Brazil, our distant cousins. I'm a fan of Brazilian volleyball, especially Gabi and Thaisa. You better work Google Translate." And it did work. Brazilian and Filipino users started talking about how familiar they feel with each other culturally and aesthetically. Uh, And that first post has been shared over 20,000 times the last I checked and got a lot of interaction. That's how the term Brazilippines came about and spread online, referring to this Brazilian slash Filipino nation.
Sophia,
Yeah.
Sophia, I'm sorry, but we are still seeing your first slide. Is that it?
Oh,
Oh,
really? Wait.
no. Now you can see another slide. Now you can go on.
Oh, weird. Okay. So let me show you the other slide. The other slide was about the the post, right? Uh, so yeah, in less than 20 minutes, we already had a flag shared on Twitter. And this flag you can see right there, I believe. A combination of the official Brazilian and Philippine flags. Uh, Here is a meme that originally said God made their best friend because he knew the word couldn't handle as a sister, and they changed it to God made his best friend because he knew our continents couldn't handle as a sisters. And the terms Filiprimos and Brasinçans also showed up. Filiprimos being a blend of Filipino and the word primo, its cousin in Portuguese. And Brazilians use the term to talk about our Filipino cousins. And same way, Brasinçans, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this the Filipino way, so correct me please if I'm not. But it's Brasinçans is a mix of the word Brazilian and pinsan, its cousin in Filipino. And it's used by Filipinos to talk about the Brazilian cousins. And well, this moment, this spontaneous moment, highlighted the social culture affinities between the two countries. So the first thing I wanted with this research was to better understand how this connection unfolds on X, and especially in which moments it reappears on the platform, to get a clearer sense of the reasons behind it and how this feeling of being cousins takes shape. The goal is to understand how the articulations between Latin America and Southeast Asia conceive, conceived through the shared experiences of Brazil and the Philippines can contribute to building decolonial perspectives and pathways within academic research. I start from the hypothesis that Brazil and the Philippines connection made visible through the Brazilippines phenomenon gathers and amplifies different forms of South to South dialogue. So affective, cultural, political, epistemic, digital, which may play a transformative role in shaping decolonial thought and theories. Well, to do that, the approach was an exploratory mapping and empirical analysis of the circulation of the term Brazilippines on X since its creation during the Olympics. Understanding this keyword as a mobilizing tool for constructing a collective transnational networked narrative. To select the corpus of this mapping, I did a manual search on X for the term Brazilippines, and 50 public posts were selected for the sample and organized in a timeline with identification data from users suppressed from it, so it can be safe for the users. And the posts were selected according to their narrative representativeness and users' engagement, so aiming to rebuild key chapters of the collective narrative rather than cataloging posts. Well, as reference, I use the studies of Jaxoglo and Zapavinia. For Zapavinia, hashtags operate as interpersonal search, as she calls it. It enables people to use technology to find one another and bond around shared values or even clash over opposing values, right? Jaxoglo then highlights the potential of hashtags to to weave narratives, identify audience, and give shape to ongoing events. That is, to use hashtags as storytelling devices. So having those reference on hashtag, I moved on to apply it with the colonial approach in mind. So for that, I draw on Gomez, Cruz, Ricord, and Sayos. They argue that most digital methods are shaped by Eurocentric epistemologies, like data extraction, for example. And so they propose methods that emphasize relational, contextual, and ethical engagement with digital technology. And then, another inspiration for that was Kim with her essay on thinking Asian Latin American as methods. Her idea is to see the connection between Asia and Latin America not merely as an object of study, but as a methodological tool, challenging conventional area studies and overlapping histories of colonialism and imperialism, and especially changing from linear narratives centered on the West to narratives that take other perspectives on time and space. Of course, beyond the methodological framework, there was the need here to, I'd say there is the need in every search, but there was the need to turn to authors from decolonial studies to better grasp the narrative and its context. So in this case, Quijano, Mignolo, Walsh, and Gomez and Santos, whose key concepts are central to this work, such as coloniality of knowledge and decolonial action. Those are my reference on this research. And well, what was found, right? First, that the sharing of social cultural experiences in digital media between Brazil and the Philippines didn't start with the 2024 Olympics. So here I brought an example, news from BBC from 2023 about Filipino children dancing to Brazilian funk, the style of music, popular style of music here in Brazil. And this video went viral in Brazil because it was very similar to Brazil, and it was curious that they were dancing our songs. Besides that, the connections go beyond social media as well. So in the 90s, something similar to what happened in 2024 Olympics had already taken place in this sports scenes. Here I show a user on Twitter that relives that old connection during the Brazilippines phenomenon on 2024. So they say that was when they say, I'm not sure, sorry, it's too small. I'm not 100% sure because I was too young to remember, but I think Brazilian volleyball players made waves in the Philippines in the 90s. I was only a kindergarten, but we'll never forget how my older sister was obsessed with Leila Barros. From shirts to posters, everything. So that was when the Brazilian female volleyball team went to Manila for a competition. Here, other example of posts that happen using the tag Brazilippines on X. So this one about writing, I'd say about precarity somehow, street aesthetics. And this is a video made in a school classroom in the Philippines that was shared as well. And the comment is Brazilian, talking about the way we dress ourselves in a similar way. It has the mesh shorts, the flip flops, and the men's fashion. Oh, Philippines, you really are. And here I also shared a video clip from Filipino singers and the Brazilian user. Okay, I'm sorry about the noise because there's a construction here happening, but I hope that you cannot hear it. But the Brazilian user says that the way the Philippines and Brazil share similarities in terms of dance and music, you really can't deny the same blood running through our veins. So a lot of references to cultural aspects of our lives, like music, dance, lifestyle, urban landscape, and well, why? So it's more than a coincidence. Many of our holidays come from syncretic traditions like we share Catholicism as a major religion in our countries, uh, one that was imposed as part of colonial domination. Our sense of humor in memes works almost like a shared political and emotional language, creating moments of recognition between people shaped by the same histories of coloniality and our institutions like family, the state, the city, work, uh, were all built within the modern colonial logic of uh, peripheralization or marginalization. Will still reproducing systems of racial, gender, and class domination nowadays. Uh, so Pedro Pablo Gomez, a professor from Colombia, says that the location of coloniality in the global south is epistemic, aesthetic, ethical, and political rather than geographical, as it draws on the lived experience of coloniality over more than 5 centuries. This is also the perspective from which this research looks at the alliance between us cousins. Well, 300 years of Portuguese and Spanish colonialism, right? Uh, we both experienced US-backed military coups and more recently faced some sort of authoritarian governments under Bolsonaro and Duterte, or ex-presidents of far-right populism or fascism. Well, ex-president Duterte was arrested in May this year, I think in May, and Bolsonaro was convicted like 6 months later. And here in those posts that happened during the Brazilippines phenomenon, we can see some political aspects of this. So someone says, I'm in favor of the Philippines becoming the newest member of BRICS. And the other one, an American posted about the American flag. So I'm sorry, but America has the best flag. All the others are just worse. And someone reposted it saying sorry word, but Brazilians just wins that. Well, and after the Olympics, Brazilippines posts kept popping up when other global events happened. So when Brazil got blocked on X on August 2024, a lot of Filipino users showed support for Brazilians, as you can see there. And when I'm Still Here, Ainda Estou Aqui, the movie, won the 2025 Oscar for Best International Movie. Many Filipinos celebrated on X. And also, Brazilians were rooting for Filipino Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle during the 2025 conclave. Uh, well, when Brazilians and Filipino call each other cousins, they're performing a kind of symbolic kinship that goes beyond national and geopolitical borders, creating something that escapes a demonic framework. So by telling stories as the Olympic Games as family, they use a language that refuses colonial hierarchies and invents its own grammar of belonging. So the very idea of a Brazilippines nation is in itself a metaphor for collectivization. In other words, the tie between Latin America and Southeast Asia can be seen as an ongoing effort to build epistemic and effective bridges that challenge Eurocentric dominant narratives. And Brazilippines is still a story in the making, one that we can all take part in shaping. Gomes Cruz, he called in ensayos, they proposed 7 elements for a decolonial practice in the study of digital culture to make visible, to intervene, to learn, to experiment, to dialogue, to collectivize, and to position. And that is to me precisely the meaning of this roundtable we're having right now. Um, Marina and Kelly talking about education in the global south, right? So this is like a continuity to my research, in a way, and yeah, that's it. Thank you. If anyone wants to reach out, here's my contact info, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sophia. That was a very nice presentation, full of interesting things. Now I will call Kelly Agra from University of the Philippines, Baguio. She is currently an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of the Philippines, Baguio. She received her PhD in philosophy from University College Dublin, where she also taught as a teaching fellow in 2023. She is interested in questions pertaining to the relationship of knowledge and social transformation. Her work falls within the intersection of social epistemology and critical social theory, but with specific focus on the colonial and feminist critiques on knowledge and society. And her presentations is entitled Undoing Colonial Miseducation, Reflections on Educational Futures for the Global South. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Ariane. Thank you also, Sophia. That was a very entertaining presentation. I learned a lot from it too. Mine might be a bit more serious, but definitely will speak to what Sophia was already alluding to earlier, that we have this long history of overlaps in terms of the types of historical events that happened in our countries. And I will speak particularly in the context of colonial education and maybe signal towards possibilities for undoing precisely colonial miseducation. If that's something we share, maybe we can share strategies on how to undo precisely the legacies of colonial miseducation. Now, I will cheat a little bit. I will also speak a bit about some cases in other post colonial contexts, but I'll definitely draw on two key thinkers, one from the Philippines, the historian Renato Constantino, and in the context of Brazil, I'll be drawing on the Pedagogy of the Oppressed of Paulo Freire. Okay, so I'll speak about the Philippines first. So that's our map. And the strongest, if you like, or at least the first one, form of colonialism was the Spanish colonialism. And it mainly took the form of missionary colonialism. And so education followed precisely this goal. But at least in the words of several historians, I will try to go briefly through these because I want to get more into the miseducation part. The form of education that was introduced in the Philippine context introduced also religious discrimination of communities who, for example, practice certain forms of animism. These were viewed, and even in some islands, when the Catholic missionaries arrived and they found that some of them had Muslim influences, that was a particularly thorny situation. And so religious schooling became at the same time not just learning about Catholicism, but learning how bad other forms of religions were. It also introduced racializing condescension towards neighbors of the Philippines that were not yet westernized. In some of the accounts of historians, they note how the Philippines was one of the first countries in the Far East that was westernized. It also introduced forms of intellectual elitism, at least particularly in the Spanish colonial educational policies. Formal education is mainly offered to the nobility or sons of the nobilities, as well as introducing socio-political and cultural subservience. So some of the historians I'm referring to here is indeed Renato Constantino and Caroline Sobrechea. If some of you may be familiar with the novels of Jose Rizal, in one of these novels, El Filibusterismo, he talks about how you are called a filibustero when you don't kiss the hand of the friar, for example. So part of the religious schooling is knowing your place, knowing how to be subservient, knowing how not to resist these perceived new religious leaders of the country. And it also introduced gender-based hierarchy and patriarchal ideology. A key historical work that I found very helpful when understanding this is the work of Charita de los Reyes on the correspondence between Urbana and Felisa, where it's a proto-novel that's owned by several households, particularly from the middle to the upper class, that teach women on how to behave, how to dress, how to speak, how to laugh. And so it was used particularly in the Spanish colonial period as a way to discipline the behavior of women. Now, I mentioned specifically middle class to upper classes because, in fact, women from lower class backgrounds were spared of this gender based patriarchal ideology, such that they remain to enjoy certain economic liberties just because they have not been schooled religiously. So, but then when the Americans arrived, they undid all of that. Now, the American pacification. So after Spanish colonialism, when the Spanish Armada was weakening, America was also becoming increasingly imperial. And as a consequence, Philippines having sufficient resources as well, they were interested precisely with the Philippines, not only in terms of the natural resources that we have, but particularly the labor resource that Filipinos have. And it's the same thing that happened in Cuba and other places as well. So education was also a tool that was used by the Americans to pacify the country because a lot of our revolutionaries revolted against a new colonizer. They revolted against the Americans who arrived in the Philippines, pretending to help us to free us from our Spanish colonizers. But the main role of education, at least in these early periods, in fact, were to pacify the country. It's also a way to inculcate a certain degree of ideological conditioning and further on the production of laborers who are already familiar with the American culture, American language. In the words of William McKinley, the American occupation or annexation of the Philippines was merely a benevolent assimilation. But then that's why I'm calling colonial education as colonial miseducation, precisely because of this deceptive character of education, at least in the colonial contexts, whereby it promises liberation, it promises knowledge, but in fact, it introduces so many more other hierarchical structures that are dominating or follow the logic of domination that you find in colonialism. And I think this is something that we deeply share with Brazil in particular. Now, the English language was used as a tool precisely to prevent, and like, there's a very interesting case in the Spanish case when it comes to language. In the Spanish case, they did not want all of Filipinos to be able to speak Spanish because that will create opportunities for them to participate politically. In the American context, they thought that that's why Spanish colonialism failed, because then the Spaniards who would not be knowledgeable of local languages, they won't be able to surveil or detect if any revolutionary group is already beginning to form. So the imposition of the English language as a national language or as a main language of public discourse or public affairs was a strategic move in the context of the Americans, because that's in alignment with what I've mentioned earlier, American education as a form of pacification, in alignment with the need to pacify the country, to make sure that the revolutionaries are watched, to make sure that the country will be more preoccupied with education, because that's one of the education was one of those things that our revolutionaries fought for. And I got this from Rowe's work, and the reason precisely why the first teachers in the Philippines were soldiers. Now, English language played a similar role. It's to ensure that they can understand the language that people use, so that before any potential coup will come about, they can already prevent that. Okay, I'll try to speed up a bit more. Now, unlike the case of Spanish religious schooling, this time education was less elite. It was transformed into mass education, and so eventually even women from lower class backgrounds, for example, have now been educated into a gendered hierarchical form of education. By gendered, I mean, so the types of work that you can do, the types of studies that you can do are based on your gender. So if you're a woman, for example, you're only allowed to learn sewing, you're only allowed to learn nursing, maybe music, religion, teaching. But then activities like philosophy, for example, law, and these likes, they are only for males. Now, I've mentioned this briefly, and definitely this is something we see in the contemporary period. One of the effects of colonial education and even the use of English language as a medium of instruction is the facilitation of labor export. I studied in Ireland, and I have a lot of housemates who are from Brazil, who and Filipinos as well, who are all carers. In some of the cases, they would come to Ireland as students and then eventually find work there. In the context of the Filipinos, we send a lot of nurses into Ireland. But that's just one example. Like when you scan the world, it is really the case that maybe not just Brazil and Philippines, even Indians as well, for example. If you see a Filipino in one of those communities, you'll see a Brazilian, you'll also see an Indian. So that's the work of Renato Constantino. Now I'll just mention some quotations of other scholars in other post-colonial contexts who have flagged the problems related to colonial miseducation. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, speaks about the use of English as the main language of public affairs, and he laments precisely this, and he thinks that it stunted the growth of a certain national consciousness that will allow them to live their culture in their language. And then you also have, of course, the inspiration of Constantino's title, The Miseducation of the Filipino, Carter Goodwin Woodson's work, The Miseducation of the Negro, where Woodson would emphasize how history has been rewritten in ways in which it presents colonizers as the good guys, so that the more you get educated, Woodson remarks, the more you get miseducated, in fact. And we see similar accounts by historians as well. World Bank commissioned textbooks on history in the context of the Philippines were rewritten in order to present that the American occupation of the Philippines was merely a benevolent assimilation. They merely wanted to help their little brown brother, as they would say. But it doesn't speak about the sorts of atrocities that they have done in enforcing that form of education. And even in something that's still going on now, and something that Brazilians are definitely familiar with, the case of desaparecidos, that once you resist, once you speak out, that there could be ways in which you can just suddenly disappear overnight. And so now I move on finally, and I have, I think, 2 minutes or 3 minutes to Paulo Freire. And I'll just read this long quotation. The very structure of their oppressed thought, the colonized in this case, has been conditioned by the contradictions of the concrete existential situation by which they were shaped. Their ideal is to be men, but for them to be men is to be oppressors. This is their model of humanity. This phenomenon derives from the fact that the oppressed, at a certain moment of their existential experience, adopt an attitude of adhesion to the oppressor, learning from the colonizer in a way. Under these circumstances, they cannot consider the oppressor sufficiently clearly to objectify him, to discover him outside themselves. This does not necessarily mean that the oppressed are unaware that they are downtrodden, but their perception of themselves as oppressed is impaired by their submersion in the reality of oppression. Now, I guess that's a key distinction, at least between Constantino, or at least the Philippine case, and what Freire is talking about. The form of colonial miseducation that Constantino is talking about is formal education. You get to become like the colonial through formal education. But what Freire highlights, at least in the last part here, is it's not just formal education. The reality, or the submersion in the reality of oppression, is educative enough that it can make you behave like the oppressor. So education here, what I'm suggesting, is not a neutral endeavor. We can see this in both the in the different post-colonial contexts. It has been used as an instrument for control, pacification, to reproduce systems of oppression. And at least in the case of Constantino and Freire, in their reflections, These are some of the similarities. They signal to the internalization of oppression and colonial consciousness through education. They contest the kind of mimicry that emanate from colonial miseducation and the formation of the sub-oppressor. At least this is very predominant in Freire's work. A form of education that discourages critical thinking. The case of the desaparecidos, for example, um, is a political form of epistemic repression that discourages precisely critique. And then finally, it packages education as something liberatory. But in fact, the more you get educated, the more you get fastened into structures of domination. So, as I've said, a potential key difference is that one is enforced through formal education, while the other is learned through the reality of oppression. I think, hang on, I'll end there, but just to signal and open the discussion, these are just very brief slides. So some of the things that I thought could lead us towards undoing colonial miseducation, first is creating structures that allow for the recognition of people's status as knowers. Do not think of them as naive, as barbaric, as has been written in a lot of historical accounts. The recognition of local knowledges as knowledge and not simply indigenous knowledge versus science, that they are in themselves scientific as well. Creating conditions for the exercise of critique and dialogue to give back epistemic authority to learners. And then finally, that for education to facilitate the exercise of freedom without fear of punishment, without fear of violence. Okay, and I'll hand over it back to Ariane for Rowena's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Actually, we still have 2 minutes, so you were on time. Kelly, after a presentation, I think we are able to see how much dialogue we have regarding all this process of colonialism and cultural imperialism that we have in Brazil and Philippines. And I have to say that I was so happy to hear you mention one of Paulo Freire's main arguments and how it is, I mean, so relevant for understanding the process of educational imperialism we have today. So it was nice. And now I would like to introduce Rowena Azada Palacios. She is an assistant professor of philosophy at Ateneo de Manila University in Philippines and a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Edinburgh. Her work lies at the intersection of critical political thought and education. She is the author of Postcolonial Education and National Identity from Bloomsbury 2021. She is also the founding chair of the Philippine Society of Education and Philosophy, a founding member of Women Doing Philosophy in the Philippines, and a co-convener of Philosophy of Education Sans Frontier within the Philosophy of Education Society of Great Britain. And her presentation is entitled Compassionate and Reparative Education for South-South Solidarity. So, Rowena, welcome.
Thank you. I suddenly felt a slight panic because when you were introducing me, the low battery sign on my laptop suddenly appeared. But what I'll do is I'll speak through. I'll just carry on. And hopefully, my battery will last. And then during the Q&A, I can plug it in. So I hope everyone can see my screen. Yeah, my slides. Okay. So I'd like to just briefly share a few reflections in relation both to some of the conversations that Sophia, Kelly, and I have had along with Ariana, as well as the description of this international forum. And my I'll skip to this slide. My reflections are around three keywords. The first being precarity, the second being education, and the third being communication. Okay, I think I will do the wise thing and I will actually plug my laptop in right now. So I'm sorry, Ariana, but if I can have just 30 seconds to plug it in, or else I'll spend the next 15 minutes
No
being
problem, no
nervous.
problem.
Okay,
We
thank you.
have
I
time.
apologize for that. Yeah.
No problem. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for understanding. I wouldn't want my presentation itself to be precarious. Okay. So I'm going to begin with the word precarity, which is one of the themes of this international forum. And my reflections are around the way that oftentimes in a lot of call for papers that we see today, solicitations of academic papers on the concept of precarity, precarity is oftentimes framed as if it were something new, right? So in the description of this particular forum, for example, there's a reference to the uncertainty of the current moment, no, today's uncertainty. But one of the reflections that that strikes me when I see precarity being framed in this way is that for the global majority, for most of the world, precarity is not a new phenomenon. It's really at the core of the human condition of the global majority. And this is something that I want to dwell on a little bit. About 2 years ago, I gave a lecture which eventually became a paper that was reflect part of it of which was reflecting on the way that philosophy, which is my home field, um, portrays moral agency. And if we look at the philosophical writings about moral agency, it is often based on certain presumptions of philosophical anthropology, a philosophy of the human person that focuses on the experiences of people who have always experienced the ability to be autonomous because they weren't, for example, enslaved, right? Um, and people who have always had the experience of their voices and their perspectives being viewed as reasonable because they were the ones determining what was reasonable and what was not reasonable. So these ideas of autonomy and reason, which are central to Western philosophical thinking, have not only shaped how philosophy has developed, but they have shaped our present day understanding, the dominant understanding of who counts as a moral agent. And of course, there is some value in this. I'm not saying that it's completely wrong. We use these categories of reason and autonomy to determine, for example, culpability when it comes to crimes. If somebody can argue that, they weren't in their right state of mind, or if they didn't have sufficient autonomy when they made a decision, then we might say that, okay, this person isn't culpable for whatever problematic things that they have done. But at the same time, those same categories of reason and autonomy have also been used as a way to gatekeep who is is seen as capable of making decisions in society and who are therefore attributed a certain moral authority for the decisions that they make. And this view of what moral agency is has therefore constantly pushed certain people aside out of those decision making spheres, whether it was women who were described as being too emotional and therefore not reasonable enough to make decisions, or whether during histories of racialization and colonization, it was indigenous peoples who were portrayed because of the difference in their culture of not being sufficiently reasonable or not being sufficiently autonomous. So, one clear example here is that historically, the religion of the dominant Anglo-European empires were considered paths towards greater autonomy, but the religions of indigenous peoples were considered paths towards less autonomy. If you're an indigenous person and you believe in religion, you are superstitious. You're not thinking correctly. But if you are an Anglo-European person and you believe in religion, you are actually, being a very, very autonomous person, right? Um, so oppositional thinkers, especially in the last century, have argued for a philosophical anthropology, a philosophy of the human person that's based more on the experiences of the global majority as well as other minoritized groups of people. And this includes both feminist thinkers who have argued that actually women's experiences um, of the perspectives that they have, the way that they see the world, is valuable, and people who come from colonized or racialized or otherwise marginalized groups and identities have also argued for a philosophical anthropology that's based on their experience, right? So Sophia and Kelly have mentioned. I'll add to the list people like Nelson Maldonado Torres, people like Charles W. Mills, Homi Baba, all thinkers who have shown that actually that experience of the reasonable autonomous thinker, that's not the universal experience, that's not the universal human condition of people across the world, right? That for many people, the fundamental experience, for example, is one of being oppressed, is one of being enslaved, is one of being unfree, right? Moreover, aspects that are not usually considered reasonable, such as the immediacy of instinct or emotion, right, are also, according to these thinkers, very valuable and important to look at. Now, I want to pivot a little bit and talk now about my second keyword, which is education. And one of the things that I argue in my work is that if you are trying to develop an educational approach that is not based on this experience of the bourgeois, um, uh, the bourgeois male that is located in the Anglo-American center of empire, then the educational approach should also be very different. We're not only talking about a kind of education that focuses, for example, on developing cognitive abilities, although that's of course also important. But what I want to argue for is an education that is compassionate and reparative and that develops these sensitivities of compassion and reparation. And when I say compassion, I'm not simply talking about being caring. So, in the philosophy of education literature, for example, there is already existing a long tradition of an education that is led by a care ethics, as Nell Noddings has described it, in which it is not just cognitive development, but also relationality and intersubjectivity, which are also valued. But I want to actually go further than that and say that if you look at the etymology of compassion, the word compassion can be translated into suffering with, right? And so, what I'm really arguing for is a kind of education in which two things. Number one, teachers are compassionate with their students in the sense that they are cognizant and constantly trying to be sensitive to the most vulnerable people in a classroom, right? But secondly, they also develop an educational approach in which the development of compassion, the development of that sensitivity to the voices of those who are oppressed, to the voices of those who are marginalized, is actually a key educational aim. And this brings me to the second characteristic of the kind of education that I think needs to develop from this reality, which is one that is reparative. I also come, like Sophia and Kelly here, from a strong tradition of decolonial thought. And I think that that's completely important. I think that education can also take one additional step further beyond the criticism of coloniality by trying to create, and this is where futures comes in, by trying to create a future that is not only decolonial but also a future that is repaired, right? A future in which those relationships that have been broken by coloniality, those oppressions, those hegemonies, those disparities are now repaired, and we're together creating a more just society. Which brings me to my third point, which is about communication. And I propose that the work towards attaining this kind of reparative and compassionate education, this reparative and compassionate educational future, includes wresting the new communication tools that we have from their neoliberal architectures to foster South-South solidarity and collective action. And this goes full circle to Sophia's presentation earlier. I think it's I'm I love the way that Sophia talks about what what X was able to create between Brazilians and Filipinos on that platform. At the same time, that platform exists within this neoliberal architecture that all of us have to contend with. I'm constantly, as a Filipino, I use a lot of social media. We're supposed to be the social media capital of the world, but I'm constantly bombarded with a kind of algorithm that, number one, is created and developed and designed precisely to make me addicted to constantly scrolling. And then not only addicted to constantly scrolling, but addicted to a kind of digital consumption in which I'm constantly wanting more and more and more content. Based on the algorithm of my history of my search history, or my my user history. And then of course all of this is done, why? Because of this neoliberal capitalist structure, right? As my husband ironically works in digital marketing, and he always says, if you are given a tool that is free to use and you aren't paying for it, that's because you are the product, right? So I'm not paying for the product because I am the product. I am the eyeballs and the views that these big tech companies and these other companies are trying to buy. Um, and now that we have these allied technologies of generative AI and other forms of artificial intelligence that are suddenly being created at such massive speed without sufficient reflection about the world that we're actually creating, which I find a little bit, not a little bit, but quite rather alarming. Again, we're seeing that the speed at which all of these tools have been developed have been developed precisely because of this space race between these big tech companies, right? When ChatGPT came out 2 years ago, suddenly, it was just there. People were suddenly got interested in it. But when one tech company after another said, okay, they're going to try to monetize it and, and try to make money off it. Suddenly it was this massive space race for everyone, Microsoft, Google, and then later on DeepSeek to start releasing their own versions. And I tend to lean on the more Gen AI critical side of the spectrum. But Sophia's presentation gives me hope that there are ways to wrest these new communication and technological tools away from these neoliberal architectures so that we can use them to foster South-South solidarity and collective action. I took note, Sophia, of the article that you cited that talked about a decolonial way of approaching these digital technologies. And I'd like to reflect a little bit more, and I hope that in the conversation that we have after this, I'd like to reflect a little bit more on what ways forward there are for creating those paths of communication. Oh, that's it. Those are my reflections for this evening, morning, afternoon, and I'm really excited to get some conversation going.
Thank you a lot, Rowena. Well, I just will reproduce what I said to Kelly, that your presentation just, I mean, you mentioned Sophia's presentation, so how we do have many dialogues regarding the necessity of fighting against cultural imperialism, all the problems that we have because of colonization and so on. So let's start the debate. I mean, I have many questions, but I think it's nice to hear everybody questions. I don't know if the audience have something. I'm just gonna open the chat, but I would like to start with one questions for each one of you, and then we can move on. Sophia, I mean, I have a very interesting question. Maybe Kelly and Rowena can help us with this, because you talked about X, a very popular social network for certain age groups in Brazil. And there are many phenomena that occur in this space, managed, and I wrote it to transcend the digital realm and materialize into something more complex. And I would like to know if do you know what X represent in Philippines? Because in Brazil, X is really popular, a very huge social network, but in certain age groups, I think. And I'd like to hear about the X and Philippines. And also, if you think that this phenomenon you analyze could somehow represent an effective dialogue between Brazil and Philippines. Because sometimes, at least in Brazilians' view, normally we make jokes in X, you reproduce, you just post and post again and post again. And I'd like to know if this really represents an effective, I mean, contra-hegemonic dialogue or something like that. And for Kelly, well, I was thinking about the use of English as an official language. Oh, this is a clue. In Brazil, we have something similar, but in a different way, because of Portuguese was just a pressure, but during the colonization era. It's not nothing so recent as the English, as you mentioned it. And I would like to know, how do Filipinos view this phenomenon today? Is there some consciousness about this problem? What the Philippine thinks about the things that you said about, I mean, the English as an official language, and maybe the problems about American education as a whole. Is there any consciousness about this? Okay. And Rowena, well, I thought many things, but I would like to make something specific about the new communications tools that you said. I would like, I mean, I am a positive person. Sophia knows that I am really positive, and then always think, okay, so we have so many problems regarding colonization and imperialism on digital media. I mean, you have Facebook and Google, YouTube, Netflix, so many huge companies doing so many imperial things. But I would like to know, to hear from you about the communication strategies that are already being used to combat imperialism in Philippines. The things that you can see that, okay, so, I mean, you talked about X and Sophia's presentation, and maybe you see something interesting about this, but I don't know if you understand my question, because I don't know if I can, you understand, so that's nice. So maybe Sophia can start.
Yeah, sure. First thing I wanted to say is that I definitely don't think that Brazilippines happened because of Twitter. Actually, the opposite. I think it happened despite Twitter, because just after that, Brazil was blocked from Twitter. So, and nowadays we have a complicated relationship with Twitter, I guess. Most of my friends don't use it anymore. People that who used to use that um, for everything, for news, for seeing their idols, they stopped using as a way of protesting it. So yeah, I think that happened despite Twitter. And actually, I started before the Brazilippines hashtag on Twitter. So I maybe Twitter made that visible, and also we are not we are not, under Twitter. We can go to Twitter and other platforms and find our ways to get through the cracks they leave for us. And I think Brazilippines is something like that. So it's not something Twitter would want to happen, but about communication and I guess I don't know how Twitter is in the Philippines. I guess you guys can talk about that better than I can. Your relation to it. But I guess what it made it visible to me, the Brazilippines connection. But I guess, as I said, it goes beyond Twitter, and I believe that we should be finding other ways to communicate, even I believe build a platform that is from the global majorities, from the global south, and not using platforms from the global north to communicate. I guess that would be the ideal pathway uh, that I would believe in. But yeah, that's it.
Rowie, do you have any idea of how Twitter is in the Philippines? I have a very small idea about.
Well, it's also changed, right?
Yeah, that's
It
true.
it used to be actually a rather middle and upper middle class social media platform in the Philippines. But one of the great things about it when it was still Twitter was that a lot of prominent people, like prominent intellectuals, politicians even, and not necessarily bad politicians, were on Twitter. And so for the first time, I think you really had dialogues that were
Mm,
being generated by I mean, admittedly by a certain elite, but at
yeah.
least it was a kind of like intellectual dialogue which
Yeah.
everyone had the potential to join in, and that was really nice. So it wasn't just that you had these public intellectuals writing a newspaper column and everybody had to agree with it, but you actually had people criticizing, responding, and I think for a long time it was good for that. And then when it became X, a lot of the same problems that have happened all over the world also happened.
Mm.
It came on the heels also of massive disinformation campaigns in the Philippines, and so that really kind of made the quality of Twitter discussion or X discussion a lot poorer. Um, and then people started to move into other
To
forms of
TikTok
social
or
media.
yeah, that's true.
Facebook has always been strong, it still is strong, but then a lot of people started to move into TikTok, for example. um so yeah, that's kind of how what X/Twitter has been in the
Yeah,
Philippines, and I think that's
in
not a unique experience.
that's true. In my experience too, or at least how I've observed, our students were using Twitter when it was still Twitter. There's a certain degree of immediacy with Twitter
Yeah.
slash X. So their sentiments,
Yeah.
for example, are immediately translated into Twitter,
Mm.
whereas you'll have a slightly more
Yeah.
curated image when you shift to
Yeah.
Facebook. So I also like
Or Instagram, even more
or
so,
Instagram,
right?
even further. Like
Yeah.
these are
Yeah.
degrees of self representation and expression that you unfold them depending on the platform. Um,
Yeah.
and I think one thing that I thought was effective, or something that Twitter effectively did, was to facilitate how to express solidarity through
Yes.
retweeting. So when
Mm-hmm.
something resonates with you, or at least that's how I observed it with um, a younger group of people in universities, it's not a numb retweeting. There's
Yeah.
because you don't really get identified as such, because there's so many people who have retweeted it with, whereas in Facebook sometimes you'll see, this person retweeted it, you can see that a bit,
Mm.
or sorry, shared it, you can see that a bit in
Yeah.
Twitter, but there's less identity politics,
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that loosely, involved
Yeah.
in resonating with a sentiment, an idea, or discussion, as opposed to when
Mm.
it is in a Facebook platform, where
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
represent a certain image of you. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. Okay, I'll briefly speak to the question. Thank you, Ariane. And the the conference that Rowie invited us to join before, Contacts and Continuities on American colonialism
Mm-hmm.
in the Philippines, really did speak a lot about this. And one thing that I thought was very helpful was when, so of course, there are responses where they want to foreground Tagalog or Filipino as a language. Other movements would be to use the mother tongue as a medium of instruction in at least primary school. But in higher education, it becomes a little bit more the political in a sense. But I thought one thing that was particularly positive that was mentioned was our students feel more comfortable to speak in class when you allow bilingualism, because that's how they are in the everyday. And part of the training I've had when I was still studying was, you have to speak straight Filipino or you have to speak straight English, because the fluency in one's language is a mark of your educational attainment as well. But then, while that has particular academic, scholarly purpose, it has the tendency also to preclude spaces where bilingualism could come in and especially in contexts where bilingualism might be more effective, particularly when we're talking about topics that are closer to lived experiences. So far, those are some of the key ideas on this, in the context of the Philippines. And what I've done also in my own work, there have also been, like, English was originally a colonial language, but the different iterations we've done with the English language, we have imminently transformed it as well into a world language. But I think, and this is one thing I draw on Roe's work, one thing that she mentions, particularly how it never occurred, for example, in the case of the Americans to also include another indigenous language. Why does it have to be just English, American English language? And so, I think in the iterations that we do in trying to use English as a world language, it should not be at the expense of the multi the plurality of languages that we can speak, and the plurality of worlds of sense and thought that it can give us access to when we speak multi languages.
And if I can just maybe answer Ariana's question to me by responding to what Kelly just
Okay.
said. I was actually reflecting on how all these new technologies are massively powerful. But that power can be used for both good and bad, right? So the bad side of it is, in the Philippines especially, we are a site of disinformation experimentation. So a lot of these global tech companies that trade in disinformation and that are hired by powerful people to plant seeds of disinformation. They actually experiment with the Philippines because we're also addicted to social media. And so they try to see how it works in the Philippines. If it's successful, then they'll replicate it in some other country. And that's I mean that's empirically backed up. No? There's been a lot of studies about that. And that's of course the bad side of it. But then there's a good side of it, which I think Sophia and Kelly have both touched on. And some of it is a little bit of both, right? So Kelly was talking about how social media creates solidarities, and some of these solidarities can be solidarities based on disinformation, right? So one of the reasons, for example, why our current president is the son of a former dictator, and our previous president was somebody who was quite well known to be a human rights violator, and yet they won, was because solidarities were built through social media, and even if they might not be the solidarities that align with our own principles and our own values, but the good side of it is precisely that those solidarities can be good. Some of the largest anti-corruption and anti-authoritarian protest movements in the Philippines, for example, were developed through these communication technologies. Something that was made possible from, 25 years ago because of texting, and then later on, through social media, and things like that. But what Kelly says about language, I think, is quite visible right now. The way that one potentially good thing about the current technologies is that it allows for automatic translation. And part of the reason why Brazilippines happened is because we were able to suddenly have these conversations across Tagalog and Portuguese and English. And these were conversations that would not have been materially possible 20 years ago because the technology wasn't there. And those are the stories that actually really fill me with hope. The fact, for example, that it used to be the case that um, imperialism kind of controlled the kind of media consumption that people had. So Filipinos, they only watched other than Filipino and local shows. They would only watch American shows, and now suddenly, there's a whole world of culture and popular culture that's open to Filipinos because suddenly they're watching, whether it's Latin American stuff or Korean or Chinese pop culture, and all of that is also part now of our consumption media diet. But it would be lovely to see how all of these beginnings of connection that are created through popular culture, what the political potential is. And when I mean political, I mean political in a good way. Like, how can we actually use these connections to create a world of greater solidarity between our different different countries. I'll say one last thing. I know I'm talking a lot, but a lot of the discourse about precarity talks about how, oh, because Western Europe, it's so fractured right now. The United States is so fractured right now, and yet outside of those centers, you're also seeing all of these connections between the rest of the world that weren't there 50 years ago or 20 years ago. And I wonder whether we kind of need to balance that narrative with the reality that at the same time, there's also a lot of connections being made between other people and the rest of the world.
Yeah, about language, I guess. I was thinking about it, and I do think that we use English in a different way that than Americans do sometimes. And I was thinking about something that happened to me when I was in the U.S. A Tunisian friend was explaining to us a Tunisian expression, and then he translated it literally to English because everyone there spoke English, like a second language, of course. And we were all from the global south, and we started to use that expression to talk to each other. It was in English, but English native people wouldn't understand the expression because it didn't make sense for them. So I guess that's something nice that we do, and we use those tools that were used to oppressors, are used to oppressors, to try to escape it. Uh, and also, Rowena, I do have a question for you. Because I read your paper, and I was thinking about when you talk about old philosophers from that we still use nowadays, and how we are sort of compassionate to them, because well, they talk about things that are important when we see that they are being racist or misogynist. We say, oh, but they didn't know that by then. And then you say, oh, of course, people from the colonies knew that the colonization was wrong. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking on how some sort of we are not very compassionate in the way we are with those old philosophers too. For example, new students. I was thinking about undergrad students, for example, like when they say something that they want to like criticize one of those big philosophers, and then we say, oh, but you don't know enough to criticize it. And maybe we don't. Most of the time, we don't. But at the same way, it's like you cannot criticize the big figures, and then we criticize ourselves then because we cannot criticize them. And I was thinking about that, and I'd like to know how you see that, and maybe how to kind of fix that.
I go back to what the meaning of compassion is etymologically. It's about sharing in the suffering, right? And so I think that it's a good rule of thumb to always ask, well, who's the person who's suffering here? And in many cases, it's not the famous big philosopher, right? But it's actually the people whose words these long dead philosophers have harmed. And so I think part of enacting a kind of historical justice is saying that for many decades, for many centuries even, we've heard this perspective, and this has been the dominant perspective, and now it's time to actually listen to those voices that were marginalized, excluded, because these louder voices and their views and their thoughts were used to exclude those people. So it's kind of like, trying to restore more balance in a world that is not balanced and in a world that is not just.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sophia, I have question. Because at least in the Philippine context, so as a way of making visible certain forms of suffering, Filipinos really love using memes. And is this something that is similar in Brazil? And would you know if there has ever come a time that within, let's say, with enough volume of memes that government people actually pay attention to the problem? Or because that's also, I think that's part of the criticism with social media and the sharing culture, when as if we've done the action just because we shared a certain image. And so in some critical theories they would see this as a false action because it doesn't get to the hard part. Yeah, I wonder if this is something you've seen before as a real political, having real political impact.
Well, the difficult question,
Yeah.
because we do use memes
Mm.
for especially to criticize politics, and
Mm.
I mean both sides use it, because we have in communication studies actually have students studying memes from the right wing as well, as we have the memes from the left wing, and well, you also have memes in the middle of that, I guess. So it's complicated because it's yeah, as we were talking about the platforms, memes are also used both ways to
Mm.
misinformation and also to share the criticism. So I think they do have an importance
Mhm.
in sharing information, but yeah, it's not very. I don't think it's so direct. Like one meme changed opinions.
Right.
I guess
Yeah.
it's more like sharing more of the same opinion you already have sometimes.
Mm.
So, but maybe Ariane can talk more about that because she's my teacher.
Yeah. Please join us. Help us.
Well, actually, in Brazil, I think Sophia said in her presentation that Twitter X is a real phenomenon in Brazil, and memes as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they have, I mean, one meme itself doesn't change a political
Yeah.
view or a political phenomenon, but it helps for sure to reinforce
Yeah,
opinion and also disinformation, because Juliana, as you said about Philippines, in Brazil we have so much disinformation in social media, and I think maybe Twitter and Instagram are Twitter, Instagram, and in Brazil we have a huge phenomenon called WhatsApp. Now,
yeah,
WhatsApp was really, really important in last presidential elections, governor elections. Uh, I mean, it's a very powerful tool to the conservative parties and conservative people. So we have this thing. And about memes itself, we actually have in the university, I have a colleague, Vitor Chagas, right, Sophia? He has a project, I think since 2014, 2015, maybe it's older, call it Museu de Memes, Memes Museum. I will share with you the link because it's a very interesting site, website that maybe,
yeah,
I mean, it's in Portuguese, but I think you can understand many things. And he has many researches about the importance of memes in political Brazilian political situation.
Mm.
So, I mean, I mean, we should talk about it. I mean, many things, but I think our
Yeah.
time is ending. So I think I'm gonna end this presentation saying that I am really grateful to make part of this panel. I really learned a lot, not only with Sophia, that I've already know because we have a partnership in UF, right, Sophia, at UF, but also with Kelly and Rowena works. I think I will give you a time just to say goodbye and share whatever you want. And I'm gonna put the Memes Museum link just in the chat so you can take a look after the presentation. Once again, thank you a lot for the time that we you share with us. So maybe
I just want to say, yeah, I
okay.
just want to quickly say thank you to all of you, but especially to Sophia who actually convened
Yes.
this and reached out to Kelly and me. And it's really been such a wonderful journey even when I was preparing for it and reflecting on this idea of, Brazil and the Philippines. And it's really been given me a lot to think about. And thank you, Ariana, for getting us all organized as well.
Yeah, I share the same gratitude. Thank you, Sophia, for reaching out. And I really enjoyed the conversation. Just before I came home from my PhD as well, I was living briefly for a month with another PhD visiting scholar from Brazil at the time. And then we were talking about how, okay, we have to, at least when she just arrived, she said, we just have to calm down the nervous system because it's a safe space. And part of the joke is now she realizes what Rawls talks about as a nearly just society. And that degree of relaxation, we cannot have that when we're in our countries. You always have to be on guard in case somebody steals something from you. But anyway, yeah, this is such a great conversation. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Ariane, for facilitating the dialogue. I really appreciated how you tried to bring our ideas together as well. And thank you, Ro. It's always um, a pleasure to learn from you.
Well, thank you too for accepting my crazy invitation that came from nowhere in Brazil. But yes, it was very nice, and I learned a lot, and I will have a lot to think about. And yes,
Yeah.
thank you,
And let's
Ari, as
stay in
well.
touch, of course.
Yeah, we're cousins
Yes.
now,
Yes,
so
Yeah, we're cousins. We're pinsan. We're
pinsan,
pinsan.
pinsan.
yeah.
Primo. We're primo. Thank you.
Bye.
Be safe. Bye bye.
All right, for the public, just so you know, there will be another panel opening at 4 entitled African Literary Futures and Diasporic Imaginaries, happening in this room, in this webinar. And in an hour, there will be a panel in French in the other webinar that we have, about social struggles and imaginaries in the Global South. I wish you all a good day.
Hi, everyone. Mr. Toure is there?
Hi. Yeah, Ture is there.
Yes. So is Mr. Diabate already there? Okay. Mr. Toure, you also speak French, right?
Yes, I do.
Euh,
I do.
ok,
Et le
donc,
français également.
oui. Mais vous avez préféré présenter en anglais.
Oui, effectivement. Vu que la production, l'article sera fait en anglais,
Mhm.
donc nous avons préféré faire ça en anglais.
D'accord. Et donc, vous serez seul aujourd'hui. Monsieur Yeo ne sera pas là.
Non, Monsieur Yo est là.
D'accord.
Il est juste allé dans la salle d'eau. Donc, nous serons côte à côte pour présenter le travail.
D'accord. Et ça va se passer comment? Comme on n'a pas beaucoup de temps,
Oui,
normalement, je ne sais pas où est Monsieur Amara. Il n'est pas encore là, mais on a trois interventions. On va parler en anglais le moment venu, mais on a trois interventions aujourd'hui.
oui, oui.
Et, et donc, c'est 1h30. C'est 1h30. C'est vrai qu'on n'a pas encore... Monsieur Kofi ne s'est pas signalé encore, mais normalement, c'est 1h30 et c'est 20 minutes de présentation pour chaque panéliste, pour qu'on ait 30 minutes pour discuter après. Donc, le plus simple pour qu'on ait suffisamment de temps, ce aurait été que l'un de vous lise. Bon, je vais mettre ma caméra, hein. Donc, on peut aussi mettre la caméra. Hi, Samira. Enchanté, Monsieur Touré.
Oui, enchanté.
Donc, j'aimerais juste demander au support technique, on commence bien à 16 heures. Je n'ai pas mal regardé, je n'ai pas mal vu l'heure.
Oui,
Oui.
je pense.
D'accord. Parce que je vois que YouTube est déjà, je vois YouTube est déjà là, mais on n'est pas encore en live.
Non, c'est pas ça. On a juste laissé ça pour ne pas risquer qu'il y a des problèmes techniques encore
D'accord.
avec YouTube.
D'accord. Donc, Monsieur Touré, je ne sais pas, comme j'expliquais, peut-être
Oui,
que si, si c'est possible que vous parliez chacun 10 minutes, ce serait parfait.
d'accord,
Mais si ce n'est pas
d'accord.
possible de faire ce changement, peut-être qu'une personne lira et les deux interviendront dans la discussion. Mais je ne sais pas comment vous vous êtes organisé parce qu'on a...
D'accord. Bon, alors, si vous le permettez,
Mhm,
nous comptons présenter, comme je le disais tantôt, ensemble. Je
mhm,
vais commencer la présentation
mhm.
et après, mon ami ou collègue va prendre la parole et puis continuer. Et puis
Ok,
voilà, pour le mot
d'accord.
de fin, pour la conclusion, je prends pour conclure. Et puis bon, voilà pour les interventions. Voilà, quand on aura peut-être des interventions, des suggestions et questions,
Mhm.
voilà, on pourra réagir si
D'accord,
vous nous donnez la parole.
d'accord, d'accord. Ça, c'est bon. Donc, Samira, je pense que Jules, c'est Monsieur Kouakou.
D'accord.
C'est le troisième
Ok.
intervenant.
Il y a deux Jules, mais
Je pense que c'est le même, mais essayez de faire
oui,
entrer un. Si ce n'est pas le bon, on le fait ressortir, on fait.
je suis en train de l'essayer.
Parce qu'il s'appelle Jules Kouakou.
Oui, c'est ça, j'ai déjà pensé à ça. Et est-ce que nous allons faire le panel en français ou en anglais?
C'est en anglais.
Oui, c'est ça, parce que je
C'est
veux
en
regarder dans le
anglais.
programme et... D'accord. Oui, maintenant.
Euh, bonjour. Est-ce que c'est Monsieur Kwaku?
Vous m'entendez?
Oui,
Oui, oui.
Ah, d'accord, voilà. Oui, c'est bien, Monsieur Kwaku. En fait, j'ai mis disons, en match deux appareils, ouais, parce qu'il y a un qui est bien lent,
Mhm,
et puis il y a un autre qui est beaucoup plus pratique. Mais j'ai fait deux fichiers, un fichier de, comment on dit ça, PowerPoint, et puis
mhm.
il y a un qui est en Word. Mais
OK,
comme je ne sais pas trop manipuler les appareils, j'ai ouvert les deux, et donc c'est pour ça que vous voyez de Jules Kwaku. En
d'accord.
fait,
Est-ce que c'est juste possible de peut-être renommer, de mettre Kwaku ou bien Jules Kwaku?
bah, vous pouvez m'appeler Jules, vous pouvez m'appeler Jules Kwaku, sinon Jules, ça va.
D'accord. Non, je disais pour le nom qui
Oui?
apparaît. Est-ce
Ah,
que
le
vous
nom qui
pouvez...
apparaît, c'est quoi là-bas?
C'est Jules, ça, c'est Jules qui
Jules, bon,
apparaît.
voilà, je vois. Parce que, bon, ça, si vous mettez Jules Kwaku, si vous voulez.
Non, non,
Ou bien vous voulez que moi je mette ça?
oui, je vous propose d'écrire sur votre...
Ah, ben oui, mais comment est-ce que j'écris?
euh,
Parce que je vois
normalement,
Jules. Oui,
si vous cliquez, vous pouvez renommer. Si
d'accord.
vous cliquez les trois petits boutons au-dessus de
Euh,
votre...
bah, sauf que moi, je ne me vois pas, en fait. Je ne me
d'accord.
vois pas. Ah. Je vous vois, je ne me vois
Ah,
pas. Bon,
il me
maintenant,
semble, il me
voilà,
semble
maintenant,
que la
j'ai mis.
caméra n'est pas. Voilà,
Voilà.
voilà,
Voilà, d'accord.
voilà.
Mais
Donc,
même
si vous
là,
regardez si vous posez le curseur sur
curseur,
la souris sur votre image,
mon
vous,
image.
vous verrez trois
Image.
boutons s'afficher au-dessus.
Ben, je ne vois même pas mon image. Je ne vois pas mon image.
Est-ce
J'ai
que
mis
vous
la
voyez
caméra.
l'écran? Est-ce que...
Je vous vois en trois. Je vois la bonne dame, je vous
Mhm,
vois, monsieur lui, Nana, je vois le collègue Bassamana, c'est ça bien ça,
mhm.
hein? C'est ça que je n'ai pas reconnu votre
C'est
nom.
cela.
Ben, je ne me vois pas.
Non, c'est bon.
Ah ben voilà, je me vois maintenant sur l'autre écran, mais c'est parti. Voilà, je me vois maintenant et je ne sais pas comment ça se passe. Je suis en train de parler,
Oui.
comme on me dit. Je me vois sur l'autre écran, mais je ne me vois pas là où je vous vois en trois. Donc, si ça se trouve, peut-être que je vais prendre l'autre écran. Voilà. Là, je me vois. Là, je me vois. Je ne sais pas si
D'accord.
vous me voyez.
Oui, nous vous voyons. Si
Ah,
vous pouvez...
monsieur, monsieur
Voilà.
Nana,
Oui, oui, monsieur
Voilà.
Touré.
oui, juste après la préoccupation du collègue Jules, je
Mhm.
voulais que vous voyez notre texte support pour voir si on peut déjà essayer de partager l'écran pour voir si ça marche.
Oui,
Voilà,
désolé.
c'est ça le problème.
C'est,
oui, bien sûr. Je voulais proposer ça aussi à
désolé.
Jules. Maintenant,
Oui,
il y a le temps pour essayer un peu les choses.
oui,
Normalement, ça ne
justement,
peut pas
rapidement,
poser
moi, je
problème.
vous vois. Par contre, je vous vois en train de vous adresser à moi. Je vois mon nom, là. Je laisse voir. Est-ce que c'est pas sorti?
Ce n'est pas grave, on peut y aller, nous vous voyons. Si
Donc, si
vous
vous me
nous
voyez, ça
entendez,
va.
c'est parfait.
D'accord. Je vous entends. Voilà. Là, je me vois. Ben, je voulais bien écrire le Jules Kwaku que vous avez dit.
Mhm.
Il y a aussi une personne qui lève la main. Je vais la donner la parole.
Allez-y donc. Sinon, je vous vois. Voilà, je me vois. Bah, moi, je suis prêt. Si vous me voyez, je suis prêt. Par
Oui,
contre, je peux pas modifier le nom. J'essaie. Ben, tantôt, c'est.
Bonsoir à tous.
oui, monsieur.
Je crois que je fais partie du panel. Diabaté Amara. Voilà, je crois qu'il vient de me connecter. Je crois que je suis le premier sur la liste, mais comme mon maître en train de passer actuellement, bon, j'observe sinon que je suis le premier sur la liste, au fait.
Non, je ne suis pas en train de passer.
Ok.
C'est le test avant. Sauf que,
Mon maître,
vous voyez le collègue qui parle.
Mon maître en œuvre, mon maître, il est dans ses œuvres. Donc, je suis fort.
Je ne sais pas s'il continue de parler. Tu arrives à changer. Il est l'heure, il ne faut pas jouer ça à ce jeu-là. Juste ça suffit. Voilà, je me vois ici. Je peux parler? Non, on dirait qu'ils ne m'entendent plus. Regarde,
Oui, moi je vous reçois.
vous me recevez?
Oui,
Oui.
monsieur Kwaku, on vous reçoit.
Bon, voilà, moi, mon test, il
Oui,
est.
maître, ça va?
La bonne dame, vous aviez posé une question, monsieur Lulana. Mon test, c'est en anglais. Hein?
Il n'y a pas de souci. Le
D'accord.
panel est en anglais, je sais. Je
D'accord,
voulais
le
juste
panel est en
demander
anglais.
si
Voilà.
on
Si vous voyez,
s'exprime
parce que
aussi.
moi, voilà, je vous vois, je me vois maintenant. C'est
Okay.
interactif.
Who is the iPhone?
Diabaté, I think it is Diabaté.
Is Diabaté Amara.
Oh,
Correct.
okay. Welcome, Mr. Amara.
Well, thank you very much, Nana.
Yeah.
My one greeting to you also, all the panelists also.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Okay, so we will follow the order in the program. That means we will start with Mr. Diabate,
Yeah.
followed by Mr. Kwaku, and then we will end with Mr. Toure and Mr. Yao. And each of you will have 20 minutes, as I already mentioned, said to Mr. Toure. And hopefully we'll have 30-minute discussion. So even though all the points are not discussed during the presentation, I think we can also have a good discussion at the end. So please keep the time. And most of the time we have a lot of questions or from the public. When not, we also have questions. I usually have questions to ask, and you know. Okay. Okay, Mr. Kwaku, I didn't receive your bio. Your presentation, I mean your
can you see it? Is it visible?
No, I mean your biography. So
I sent it to you.
The introduction. When?
You didn't get it?
I don't remember receiving.
Yeah, but I sent it twice even.
Yeah.
I sent it 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Yes.
Yeah, I even saw it.
You saw it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. I don't know if I can still send it. I don't know if you could find it. If I send it now, is it possible?
Let me check it. Right. Samira, did you get something?
No, nothing, honestly.
Could you send it again, Mr. Diabate?
I'm going to try. I don't know if
did you send it directly to?
I'm going to try to send it again.
Okay, thank you. So since we start,
then what about ours? I mean, my
yes, I already have yours.
Okay.
Yes, I already have yours, and Mr. Diabates. I didn't get Mr. Kwaku's biography, but Mr. Diabates and Mr. Touren Yeo, I already have it.
Thank you.
Yes, and I also have your authorization, so everything is really well. Thank you.
Mhm. So maybe while while Mr. Diabate is presenting, Mr. Kwaku, you can still send the bio. Okay. Are you ready to go live? Okay. Samira? Give me the signal.
Understand this. Shutters. Leave them. They see it on the screen.
Samira, can you start? Samira, can you make me co-host?
Yes, and I'm going to change the names of everyone, so that's getting clear
Yeah.
with you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I guess we are not live yet.
Are you co-host now?
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we live? Can we go on?
Should work now.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to panel 24.
26.
26th, sorry. 26th of this International Forum on Global South Studies. We have an interesting panel today which discusses the features of African literatures and also from the diasporic imaginaries. We have 4 panelists, but 3 presentations. The first one is Dr. Amara Diabate. So I will present the panelists and then the presentation will start and will follow one after another. So Mr. Amara Diabate is a lecturer and researcher, senior lecturer in literature and civilization of English-speaking countries at Félix Houphouët-Boigny University, Cocody, Abidjan, at the English department. He also holds a master's degree in peace culture, option prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts from the UNESCO chair. His research interests include the writing of new authors and the different forms of contemporary conflict in human societies. A freelance consultant in conflict management, Diabate Amara is a trainer and teacher of specialized English at various local university and state institutions. He is also a freelance translator of economic and legal English. He will present today on From Instability to Transformative Visions in Contemporary Ghanaian Literature, a study of Tale of Bluebird from near Ayikwe Parks. Then I will present Mr. Bassamanan Touré and Jean-Baptiste Yeo. Mr. Touré holds a doctorate thesis in American Civilization and Literature from University Félix Houphouët-Boigny, Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. Since 2022, he's a senior lecturer at the Department of English, University Peleforo Gon Coulibaly in Côte d'Ivoire. He is the author of 7 articles and participated in 8 international conferences. He holds 4 years experience in the higher education, but before that, he taught for 6 years after graduating from the teacher training college, what is called École Normale Supérieure of Abidjan in 2016. His fields of interest are mainly racism, racial issues, education, gender, oppression, deconstruction, change, and psychoanalysis. He is a member of Grela Research Laboratory in Literature and Linguistics. Then we have Mr. Jean-Baptiste Yeo, who is a lecturer at the University Peleforo Gon Coulibaly, Korogo, Department of English in Côte d'Ivoire. He defended a doctorate thesis on American literature and civilization in June 2020, peculiarly in American ethnic studies. He is the author of a dozen of articles, other works, and participation to a wide range of national and international symposiums. He is interested in minority studies of Anglophone countries as well as comparative literature. So we'll start with Mr. Amara Diabate, who present a paper entitled From Instability to Transformative Visions in Contemporary Ghanaian Literature. Then we will follow with Mr. Yeo and Mr. Toure, who present on the intercultural and the building of resilient societies in Tracy Kidder's Strength in What Remains. I will present Mr. Kwaku a little bit later when he will present. So let us start with Mr. Diabate. You have the floor, Mr. Diabate.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lunana. I think this is the second time I'm taking part to the this kind of panel, and I want to greet all the panelists and the colleague, and also special greeting to my master, Dr. Kwaku Jul. Okay, and after that, and I will try to lay emphasis on my topic as such. Okay. My topic is From Instability to Transformative Vision in Contemporary Ghanaian Literature, a study of A Tale of Blue Birds by Ni Ayukwe Pax. Okay, so to do these jobs, okay, I want from a perspective, well, great perspective, but the thing is that Ni Ayukwe Pax Tale of Blue Birds stand as a striking example of how contemporary Ghanaian fiction reimagine national and cultural identity from the interplay of history, modernity, and knowledge system. Okay? Written in the post-colonial era, the novel explored the tension between scientific rationality and indigenous wisdom, between inherent instability and the potential for transformation. So the question is that, how's that tale of Blue Birds go from instability to transformative vision? So, using the lens of a new historicism, the analysis examine how past texts both mirror and rehearse the historical realities of post-colonial Ghana. The key concept guiding this interpretation emphasizes textuality or history, historicity or text, and power enable a deep reading for the novel as both a product and a producer of cultural narrative. Okay, this is a text-based, if you want, a topic-based one, because we try to use the new historicism and lay emphasis on some concepts. And I will try to develop this concept from the Tale of Blue Birds to understand, okay, the topic as such. So the first aspect is the textuality of the history. Why the textuality of history, the Tale of the Blue Bird? From this topic of instability to transformative vision. Okay? So in the new historicism, the textuality of history suggests that history is not an objective record, but it is a narrative constructed through language and discourse. So, in Tale of Blue Bird, Park narrates Ghanaian history not through grand political events, but through the microcosm of the fictional village named Sonokrom. This setting section has a textual reconstruction of the Ghanaian past, a site where traditional and colonial epistemology clash. In reality, through the detective framework, the protagonist called Kayo, a Western trained forensic pathologist encountered a mysterious death that drew him into a world governed by traditional belief. History here is not a linear or factual, but woven into myth, oral tradition, and local idiom. One example in the text is the narrative structure itself, with shifting between English and account inflected expression embody the textuality of the history, showing how the Ghanaian experience is mediated through the competent narratives. Part starts here, vast transform historical instability. It means colonial legacies, fractured identities, and modernizations into a literary space where multiple tribes coexist. The reader is invited to see how history speaks not through official archives, but through stories, rituals, and silences. Why? Okay, the author trying to use this different paradigm in the text. Okay, this aspect conduct the study to the historicity of the text. What is the historicity of the text in the tale of Rupert? This historicity of the text refer to the idea that every literary work is embodied in and shaped by its historical and cultural conditions. This is very important in the new historicism, conception and path. Paths novel emerged from the Ghana grappling with globalization, technological modernity, and the lingering shadow of colonialism. The novel reflects post-independence anxieties about authenticity, corruption, and the erosion of indigenous knowledge system. So, the protagonist, Kayo, reliance on Western science, contrasts with the local elders' faith in ancestral wisdom. This position mirrors the historical tension between colonial education and traditional epistemology that marks Ghana intellectual and political landscape since the independence. The text does not reflect modernity, outright, but call for an inclusive understanding of knowledge, one that respects indigenous perspective. In this regard, the novel language oscillates between the formal English and the pidgin, sense and the proverb. This situation also reflects the historicity of post-colonial discourse, which situates its fiction in the hybrid linguistic space, symbolizing Ghana's own hybrid identity. Verse, Tale of the Bluebird became a historical text that participates in rewriting what means to be modern and Ghanaian in the 21st century. After understanding the historicities of the text, now we lay emphasis right now on the power and the knowledge. What is the power and the knowledge? And not create instability from the transformative vision in the novel. Okay? Power and knowledge is central to its new historicism. The analysis of power, how text produce, resist, or redefine structure of authority. In Tale of Bluebird, power operates through epistemology. Who has the right to define the truth? This is the question. Who has the right to define the truth? Is it the Western one or the African one? This is the question. And the protagonist, Tayo's scientific approach represents institutional and colonial power, the authority of the modern state, and is a Western framework of knowledge. In contrast, the villagers' oral narrative and ritual embody local power, structure rooted in tradition. This tries to make a clash between the system of knowledge. Park here, what can I say? Park exposes the limitation of both systems, suggesting that true understanding arises from dialogue rather than domination. From dialogue rather than domination. This is a great aspect of this novel. The detective investigation itself became a metaphor for post-colonial inquiry. The attempt to uncover truth obscured by colonial narrative. The end of the novel, the protagonist, Kayo's worldview shifts. We don't know why, but we'll understand later. He learned that indigenous wisdom contains form or logic and truth that Western method cannot grasp. So power then is not merely hierarchical, but Freud redefined through heart or listening and reinterpretations. So in this perspective, what that make this novel from instability transformative vision? This is the fourth aspect of this analysis. The movement from instability to transformation in the novel mirror Ghana broader historical trajectory. This instability symbolizes the mystery of the corpse, the confusion between science and magic, and the linguistic fragmentation represent the desorientation of post-colonial identity. Yet, that transforms this instability into the vision of called cultural synthesis. The novel doesn't advocate a return to an untamed past, but envision a future where tradition and modernity coexist to find a kind and a great solution for the society. Through the protagonist's career transformation, Park articulates a third space in Omin Baba's sense, where hybridity became creative rather than chaotic. The Ghanaian experience, one defined by the binaries of colonizer and colonized, became a model of epistemistic dialogue and resilience. This is the society of Ghana today. Okay, Ghana society are being considered as a model of democracy today because there were some kind of paradigm that trying to coexist and cohabit together. So, to conclude this paper, I will say that Fruit Tale of Bluebird, Ni Aikwe Pass, demonstrate how fiction can act as a site of historical reconstruction and cultural negotiations. The textuality of history reveals that the Ghanaian past is a narrative open to reinterpretation. This is very important. The historicity of text show that the novel itself is shaped by post-colonial realities of language, identity, and globalization. And the focus on power exposes how competing forms of knowledge, scientific and traditional, negotiate authority and meaning. Ultimately, Park's novel moved from depicting the instabilities of post-colonial fragmentation to envision a transformative cultural synthesis, meaning that culture can dialogue together, not to be dominated by another one. In this way, Tale of Bluebird redefine contemporary Ghanaian literature as a space where history, power, and imagination converge to produce new, empowering vision of African modernity. This is the end of this, if you want, communication. Nana, I want to be brief.
Thank you very much, Mr.
If the question, I
Diabate.
will have the question, I will try to answer back to you.
Thank you very much. That will let us leave us much room, more room for discussion. So we'll follow with Mr. Toure and Mr. Yeo, who present on the intercultural and the building of resilient societies in Tracy Kidder's Strength in What Remains. Please do not forget to open your microphone.
No, I'm trying to. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Louis Nana. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, tech support. I would like first and foremost to thank the University of Tübingen for that opportunity they are giving us to present our research work. It's really a privilege for us to interact with you. Since the beginning, we've been listening to others panelists, and we can realize that it's a great opportunity because we're learning So it's a sharing rendezvous. Thank you so much to University to begin for that opportunity. On the intercultural and the building of resilient society in Tracy Kidder's strength in what remains. Oh. Okay, yes, it's okay. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Toure Bassamano, and my colleague is Dr. Yeo Jean-Baptiste. Let's get going for the presentation. Context and justification. Tracy Kidder's Pulitzer Prize-winning Strength in What Remains embarks the reader in emotional, true story of the Burundian ethnocide. However, beyond the story of atrocities and survivals, one can perceive intercultural relationship moving on throughout the novel. This international symposium offers an outstanding opportunity to discuss the place of the intercultural shuffling through the waves of modernity. Thus, communications is grounding on three hypotheses, which are the following. First, interculturality is consubstantial to contemporary social realities. Two, the intercultural factors helps build better human societies. And at last, memories or remembrance constitute a therapy for healing past traumatic experiences. Problematic. In which way is Kidder's novel an epistome of interculturality? How does the dichotomy of remembrance act as a panacea for healing? How can interculturality help mitigate contemporary social issues? In order to carry out this research work, we resort to sociocriticism under Claude Duché perspectives. So it is rather a Duchéan perspective that we refer to. So that's theory is defined as literature is obviously implicated, or that theory shared the postulate that literature is obviously implicated in the process of ensuring that ideological and often cultural structures are communicated alongside linguistics one. So the critics will question spatial temporal diegesis since the novel and the literary text are production of a social space, which Jimon Kazimi refers to as la société du roman, or the society of the novel, or the universe of the novel. We delve on sociograms as a vague, unstable, conflating set of partial representation centered around a core interacting with another, referred to Claude Duché. Since one connects to the text, it reveals its sociality. Accordingly, Luobu also referred to social criticism as bearing the seed of what he will call l'art de vivre ensemble, or the art of living together. But that art of living together will call forth another concept, which is the transplacement. We call it in French, it will say le concept du transplacement. Sociocriticism establishes osmosis between social and cultural reality of the writer and the text which emanate from his creative production. After the theoretical points, I will now give the floor to my colleague that will continue our presentation. Dr. Yeo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, Dr. Toure Basamana. Before starting, I would also like to pay tribute to Tübingen University, our host, who have kindly accepted our proposal of communication. I would also like to, to thank the moderator, Professor Luinana, for this outstanding presentation. Well, I said we are trying to analyze Tracy Kidder's strength in what remains as an epitome of interculturality. But the very first part we would like to develop concerns the manifestation of the intercultural. As far as this part is concerned, we would like to develop some concepts, some key concepts. And the very first is pictorial writing. Pictorial writing is the form of writing. It tends to combine the material and the figurative. How those elements can be seen in the way of the author, either by visualization or visualizing writing, or when the author writes in order to visualize. In other words, the writing of strength in what remains is strongly influenced by images and visualization. Nature plays a prominent role through descriptions of landscape. Through a quotation from the novel. The author, who appears to be also the narrator, says that, or narrate, as we drove through southwestern Burundi, I felt as we were being followed by the mountain called Genza, the way a child feels followed by the moon. The road climbed through deeply folded countryside. We would round a corner and another broad face of Ganza, meaning the mountain, would appear. Okay, this omnipresence of landscape speaks of the cultural dimension of the novel, as if the author and the narrator, the protagonist and the author of the novel, were being followed by the protagonist or the central character's own culture, here epistomized by a mountain. Next. We would also like to discuss culture shock, and reverse culture shock. Okay, the first element is the name of the protagonist, Deo Gracias, meaning thanks be to God. Is first and foremost the testimony of interculturality, as his mother named him after this Latin word. She'd learned in church for having nearly died during his gestation and birth. Deo's mother deemed it necessary to be grateful to her Lord for her life and that of her son. Names have meaning and people are profoundly attached to them. Names recount people's history, their stories, their worries, their hopes and prayers, namely. In Deo Gracia's case, that name apparently espoused him, for he escaped genocide in Burundi and Rwanda. We'd also like to discuss culture shock as far as alcoholism and nutrition is concerned. In its intercultural Path, the protagonist Deo Gracias will learn different ideologies or conceptions about alcoholism and nutrition. For example, in the US, people drink alcohol in bottles concealed in paper bags because it was illegal to drink in public. To Deo's surprise, since in public was where most Burundians drank. As a consequence, everything to him was upside down. So many heavy people sat on the stood of buildings. Some looked almost too heavy to walk. And back home, only the rich, back home meaning being in Burundi, only the rich were fat. And yet, this was obviously a poor part of New York. The second part is to dwell or to focus our analysis on the journey of remembrance as a panacea for healing. How do memories or how does remembrance act as a cure or a healing factor? Remembering in Burundian conception is referred to as to gusimbura. To gusimbura someone is to remind people about something bad. But those notions of gusimbura are, as far as literary tools are concerned, meaning referred or represented by a figurative language known as aposiopesis, which is a rhetorical figure of speech where a sentence is deliberately broken off or left unfinished. It is used to create a dramatic effect, often implying a speaker is unable or unwilling to continue due to strong emotion such as rage, shock, or exasperation, leaving the listener to imagine the rest of the fact. As far as remembrance is concerned, cultures differ. In the Western world, this is a typical example of aposiopesis, which brings the narrator to understand that in Europe, people try to forget, while in Burundi, in Europe, people try to remember, while in Burundi, they try to forget. When the author posits that in Burundi, they tend to forget, meaning people who passed away or relatives, it means that they are still alive in the mainstream consciousness, that they try to forget dead people. However, the author also argues that Western people try to remember dead relatives. It means they have so long been separated from their old relatives that they hardly remember them, as they have been absent even before their natural death. This is also a deconstructive perspective because people who try to forget actually remember, and people who try to remember actually forget. The last concept we'll try to survey on is deictics, which a word or expression referring to meaning, which meaning depend on the situation or context object, pronouns, possessive, adjectives, and so on and so forth. And in this narration, one can easily read, she wanted to help him out of this place. But Deo, meaning Deo Gracias, had entered the country of despair. It was not uncomfortable. There were no way he could extract himself from this time and this place. Emphasis our. In this context, she refers to the woman who saved Deo Gracias a Tutsi from militiament. The last part concerns cultural confluence and mutual enrichment. And the very first element is linguistic library. Deogracias is a Burundian, let's say, young man who escaped genocide from Burundi and Rwanda. By extraordinary circumstances, he landed in the United States. So apart from learning the American culture, it also grasps or integrated the linguistic hybridity, which can be sensed in the way he speaks English. Deogratias exemplifies linguistic hybridity in both his way of speaking and the melting he makes of his culture and the English language. The author, who appears to be the narrator, also says his English was accented with French and Burundi and Kurundi, which is a local language in Burundi and Rwanda, and sprinkled with misplaced emphasis, meaning he used to literally translate the concept, the Burundian concept, in English language, which are not always grammatically correct. Also, another concept is the cloning of space and time. In the corpus, time and space are cloned. That is to say, they are reproduced in the mind of Deogracias and other as a protagonist and other characters. Out of this geographical estrangement, the protagonist find, or most of the time, builds connections with his homeland in order to keep tracks of events. In so doing, it juxtaposes the Burundian and American realities, finding ramps between country of origin and host country help him stay afloat. The transfer of skill and mobility of human resources, a metaphor of the clinic. Deo gracias for the diagnosis of novel is a medical student. He's been learning medical science for about 12 years. So back to Burundi or back to Rwanda, he decided to build a clinic to help his people, to help his communities, to help the former militiamen, brave, to help everybody with no distinction. So living abroad is an opportunity for diasporic community to learn and get professional training that can be useful for the original community. Due to social mobility, the transfer of skill and human resources guarantee the intercultural collaboration. As a matter of fact, the clinic he built, meaning Dio Gracias, went back from the US, is somehow the cloning of Western civilization in terms of know-how, in terms of technological advancement, social cohesion, and benevolence. As a consequence, a visitor in the clinic posits, we have come to visit America, meaning America has been deported or transported, at least in a minoristic level, to Rwanda or Burundi. This is the end of my presentation. I will give the floor back to my colleague to give you the takeaways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, dear colleague Yeo, for your presentations. To conclude that presentations, as key takeaway, one may bear in mind that interculturality entails the vulgarization of cultural values, but also culture. It implies culture and reverse culture shock. With biographical voices, strength in what remain is an epistome of healing voices through remembrance. And at last, the intercultural process is an opportunity to close space and time by reproducing universal precepts and roll back contemporary challenges. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your attention. Professor Nana, we are done. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toure and Mr. Yeo. I will introduce you perfectly followed, kept the time. I will introduce Mr. Kwaku briefly for his presentation. Mr. Kwaku is Associate Professor at Université Félix Houphouët-Boigny, Abidjan Cocody, at the Department of English. And his areas of specialization are African studies, post-colonial studies, eco-criticism, new historicism. He is a member of SCAL. This is the doctorate school at the University of Félix Houphouët-Boigny, Abidjan, and also member of LITEC, LLITEC Research Laboratory. His paper today is entitled Blurring the African Dream of the West, a post-colonial analysis of Africa's migratory dilemma in Aka Amas, the Resolutionaries, and Chimamanda Adichie, Ngozi Adichie Americana. Mr. Kwaku?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you. Maybe
right.
Mr.
I
Toure,
see
could you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Toure, could you?
Yeah.
Stop sharing the screen because we are still seeing your screen. Mr. Yeo.
Give me one second. I will, is it okay now?
No, you just have to stop sharing.
Let's.
One moment. Okay, I can do it. It's okay. I did it.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
So, Mr. Kwaku, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Nana. Sorry for the disturbance because I don't master such technological things. Now, to gain time, I will go straight to the topic of my presentation. I don't know if you hear me. Can you? Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes.
Okay. So the topic is Blurring the African Dream of the West, a post-colonial analysis of Africa's migratory dilemma in A.K. Armour's The Resolutionaries and CN Editors Americana. Right. I'm going to use slides and mix them up with the text properly so called. Right. Now, my motivation was that of a commitment to the issue of migration, which is becoming an insurmountable problem in today's globalized world. So I felt a personal interest in it. My interest is to highlight and echo African writers, so the literary representation of the issue. Doing so, I wish to pinpoint the death rates that face young African migrants on the roads and the poor situation, actually nightmarish situation that they endure once they become illegal immigrants in Western countries. This work has got a societal and even social interest also. The social interest is to warn and instruct prospective African migrants on the danger of migration, but at the same time to sensitize African policymakers on the need to create facilities which should be, let's say, viable enough to benefit the youth and at the same time benefit from those youth energies for a sustainable development of Africa. To reach my objective, I chose two West African novels. One from a female writer to have some sort of female perspective, another one from an let's say, an old age, I'm going to say old generation writer who still writes. I mean, Ikwe Armor, a Ghanaian writer who's written a lot of books and in whose the resolutionaries appear salient around the issue of migration in the sense of damaging or endangering the lives of the young African, let's say, migrants. And the other one is Adichie. Adichie's full name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's largely praised as one of the rising figures of the new generation of African writers. I found their representation much challenging because both novels were published in the same year, 2013. So from the perspective of the two perspective of male perspective and female perspective, but at the same time, having the viewpoint of a writer, a senior writer, who is over 80 years, and another one who is a young one, is to try to, let's say, critically analyze the convergences, but at the same time, the differences that could, let's say, rise from their presentation. To do so, I decided first, and it is, let's say, usually the case, to define the keyword. The keyword here is migration. It is migration, which is my focus. And migration is polysemous as a word. Its definition and implication draw on the various fields which study it. But as I said earlier, our move is critical analysis of fictional text. So we're not concerned with theorizing on, let's say, migration from social or human sciences or scientific perspective. No. To do so, I would like to show you to show you those books. Amars, the resolutionary, you can have on the back page, back cover page, you have the summary here, and then that of let's say, Adichie Americaner with its I'm going to say blurb also on the cover page. And I proceed after the definition of the keyword to state the background, the theoretical background. But before that, even I outline there, let's say, that conversation. I mean, the communication that we're having now. So I set the outline. It operates followed a threefold articulation. The first reveals the theoretical background of the representation. And the second detects and informs on Ammer's political and ideological stance in regard to young African illegal migration across the Atlantic Ocean on the one hand, and through the Sahara Desert and across the Mediterranean Ocean to Europe on the other hand. And the third part reads in Adichie's Americaner, interlaced perspective of socio-economic, cultural, and psychological interests. Coming onto the theoretical background, migration, both as a concept and a practice, has generated a range of theories relating to diverse scholarly fields, as I said before. So much so that they exist as various as sociological, economic, political, ethical, religious, cultural, demographic, geographical, historical, and many more approaches to, let's say, migration. All of which fall in the realm of either social sciences or human sensors. Historically, these theories derive from Everett Spurgeon Lee's groundbreaking theory, which he presented at the 1935 annual meeting of the Mississippi Valley Historical Association. But before him, the known attempt on the issue was from Hans George Ravenstein, whose two papers entitled The Laws of Migration, issued respectively in 1885 and 1889, posited 11 principal laws which sought to explain and predict migration pattern in the 19th century England. Pursuing with, let's say, the theoretical background, assuming that migration studies are under-theorized, Eingers has nonetheless reviewed some of the most recent theoretical approaches, which include Babu-Gunjer's migration system theory, Zielinski's mobility transition theory, Skeldon's work on migration transition, Harris and Tudor's neoclassical migration theory, Pure's dual labor market theory, Stark's new economic labor of migration, economics of labor migration, Massey's cumulative causation theory, and the many more isolated attempts to come up with generalized understanding of migration and, let's say, of migration phenomena. Having dealt with the theoretical background as a whole, now let us see Hammer's position in his representation of migration. Let me recall that the novel is not, let's say, migration-based. No. It tackles various topics regarding modern Africa and laments their somewhat lethargy of African intellectuals. But it also, I'm going to say, scratches the political and ideological subservience of African rulers, so that Hammer sees migration as one of the consequences of Africa's inefficiencies and incapabilities, not in regulating migration, but in conceiving sustainable development policies that should retain the first manpower, because the young represent the future. And Ibrahim is the character who encapsulates Hammer's political pamphlet in regard to the death risk taken by Africans on their migratory routes. Migration is not perceived in the novel as a voluntary, willing adventure, but a necessity to ensure survival. So African political rulers are blamed for endangering the lives of the citizens, not now that they're incapable of offering viable socio-economic alternative to the latter. Hammer pursues is criticism and criticizes the West ideological dominance of Africa. So he sees the hand of, let's say, former colonial and today's, let's say, Western multinational companies behind the migratory adventure of young Africans. The total control of the economic sector by Western multinational companies and the subsequent remote control of Africa's politics by former colonial powers are implied by Hammer as the primary causes of forced international migration on the continent. Because I'm talking of international migration, because as is shown and even documented, migration within Africa is much larger than migration, let's say, outside of Africa. But unfortunately, it is the last one that is, let's say, that is retained and it's redundant, And this is when you come down to Adichie's point, what makes a blending of post-colonial posture with, let's say, some sort of critical race theory of intersectionality. We come to this later. But after Amar, so Amar's post-colonial stand is informed by that post-colonial criticism, that of the colonial, the critic of the colonial legacy, and the critic of the chapter, if ever, chapter neo-colonial exploitation across Africa. And Amar's relentless position has honed him to be labeled an anti-imperialist writer by many critics, especially Western critics. They pass down to editors socio-economic, cultural focus on immigration. It is true in Americana. Migration, I'm going to say, prompt the whole narrative, but it is on migration, on immigration rather, on immigration that, right, we've chosen to focus our analysis. In this, Adichie particularly depicts the socio-economic and cultural hardships of African migrants, especially of those with restricted visa, like students, and those who become irregular. A more subtle dimension that heightens those immigrant precariousness is the cultural clash entailed by migration. Adichie uses migration as a cultural framework for the construction of intersectional identities. A cultural philosophy combines critical race assumptions and post-colonial tenets wherein dominant groups impose and shape the identities of minorities through a painful and confusing process. For immigrant personal and community identities are forced to submit to the frustrating, right, cultural superiority of their host countries, They ensure the sense of cultural and identity loss that a family felt in the initial contact with the US society. A family is the main protagonist. I mean, one of the main protagonists. The female is the one who expresses and experiences the female, let's say, I'm saying perspective of the hardship endured by migration. The other is Obinzi. Obinzi, who is I'm going to say young age, love to a family. So here, when she went to the United States for the first time, she had to adjust her speaking accent, her dress code, hairstyle, and almost everything that formerly identified her as a Nigerian citizen and an African girl to a new US social and cultural environment. She even feels racialized and rejected on account of her phenotypes, like the many Black people living in the USA. But unlike those, she suffered a threefold discrimination. Discrimination because she's Black, discrimination because she's African Black or Black African, and discrimination because she is what she is. It meaning she's a woman, a female. So her discrimination that she felt is even, let's say, more acute than that of let's say, the other minorities that suffered by other minorities in the United States of America. In addition to the cultural, economic, let's say, cultural, social, economic plight, there is another one, which is psychological, and moral that migrants undergo. And addition underscores that psychological and emotional agony, together with the moral collapse that illegal immigrants undergo in the face of regulatory policies. She stresses the paralyzing fear that daily overwhelms illegal immigrants and the helplessness in foreign countries where they're officially deprived of any civil rights. Fear of being caught and imprisoned, and fear of economic insecurity lead easily to moral debasement in terms of lies and frauds, which become a mode of survival as the basic need for food and housing compels illegal immigrants to submit to frauds on identity and frauds on license, fraud on names even. This is what I mean by identity. So not only identity, as you say. In Americana, as I was saying, it is Obinze, the other protagonist, who conveys Adichie's warning to prospective migrants, be they regular or irregular. On the whole, Adichie's cultural perspective on migration reveals both cultural intersectionality, right, of race, identity, gender, class, and disability even, with multiculturalism. Effeminate cogently exemplifies that postulate quite well when at the end of the day, 13 years later, she claims her trueness, as in William Du Bois' formulation, there is a twofold identity as a Nigerian and an American. In conclusion, let's say that the critical analysis of the resolutionaries and Americana has revealed different but complementary perspective on the representation of international migration in the African novel. Armour's long-standing criticism of African elites has posited political and ideological accountabilities behind the death risk of young Africans' migration to the West. As for Adichie, she's rather chosen to underpin the socio-economic and cultural traps, as well as the psychological and moral collapse, which threaten to turn the African dream of the West into an actual nightmare. This representation, which mostly mirror post-colonial doctrine, display personal and societal benefit as they at once sensitize and educate on the factuality of migration and appeal to creating incentive facilities likely to give hope and comfort to Africans at home. For, as the saying goes, there is no place like home. Thank you very much for listening. Actually, they didn't follow me.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Okay,
I followed you. I followed you. We followed you. Sorry,
okay.
It's the technique. I was trying to open my microphone and my camera. So the other panelists can also open their microphone, their camera, so that we can engage in the discussion. So thank you very much for each of you for your presentations. Which give us another perspective on the topic, on the two segments of our topic of this year's forum, which are on the one hand the fact that we live in an uncertain times, and on the other hand, how we can manage, strive, coming up with new way of thinking, of new ways of doing. And I find your presentations related, first because it's really a perspective from an African point of view first, because you are presenting African novels and African experiences. And in each experiences, what I've noticed is also the preeminence, maybe the first two presentations, the preeminence of African knowledges yes, African knowledge, but also, and this will be the point of our discussions. So the first is this cultural aspect in both novels. The second one is, of course, this impact or this importance, relevance of memory, remembrance, but also forgetting. I find it interesting because we had the keynote yesterday with the Cambrian philosopher Jean-Godefroy Bidima. He was trying to map various places, lieux of the future from Africa. And one of these places was what we do with our memory, what we do with the past, but also he was addressing the question of the silence or the forgetting. What do we forget? What do we choose to remember and what do we choose to forget? And the last point, which is closely related, Mr. Kwaku, you didn't maybe you can come back again to this because you didn't mainly mention it. It's the place Amas gives also to the pre-colonial knowledge, African knowledge in the resolution, because it's a critique of these intellectuals and state, these intellectuals who only take resolutions in conferences, but without taking action, concrete actions, and politicians also.
No implementation.
Yes. And the conclusion, I really like the conclusion you gave, Mr. Kwaku, which is the European dream is seen as a nightmare.
Sure.
And instead of looking there, we can build a future right in Africa. So these are the 3 points I would like us to discuss. First of all, the place, how you see the place of indigenous knowledges, because it's also languages. It's in the case of these novels with Mr. Diabate, the novel you presented. So these epistemologies, yes, these indigenous epistemologies, the places of these epistemologies from your perspective, from your novels, to help us reflect on the fragilities of our societies, namely African societies, and how we can rely on them, but also having a critical view on this. If the novel help us to have a critical view on this epistemologies or knowledges in relation to the uncertainties, which also lead people to leave the continent and go away. This is the first question. So I will give the questions and then we'll discuss. The second one is the question about memory. Rewriting the past, and also facing something like the genocide, with this idea of the Guzimbura facing the genocide. And yes, I was always asking, okay, what is memory really history, and what do we do with the question of forgetting? Bidima was advocating for yesterday, because he was really advocating or saying, okay, we also have to address the question of forgetting, because memory is not history. Memory is not really the past, it's a rewriting of the past. So how do you address these questions in your novels? From your novels, not only from your novels, but also maybe from your own perspective and your research. Maybe we can start with these questions.
The question
We
is
can
addressed
start
to
whoever wants to
Yeah.
take it.
to everyone.
Okay.
Yes,
Professor.
for everyone, because as I said, Mr. Kwaku,
All right. So if you want, let's start with migration. You want to start?
Okay, Mr. Toure want to start.
Okay.
So we can start with Mr. Toure, then Mr. Kwaku, then Mr. Diabate, or Mr. Toure, Mr. Diabate, Mr. Kwaku. It's how you want.
If you want, can start. If you want.
No, somebody is starting already.
Mr. Toure starts because he was already speaking.
Sure.
Okay, right. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Nana, for giving the floor. I mean, you're raising a really interesting, relevant questions which pertaining to memories and how it helps sometimes writers or correctors or rewrite the past. But as you say, and you're right, that memories calls into question another dimension which has to do with the question of forgetting. And in the novel, we are delving on for that communications. There is a metaphor of remembering and forgetting. I will start by that episode and now give you my point. When the authors holds that in Europe or in America, for example, he has the impression that people are trying to remember. Meanwhile, in Africa, in Burundi, they try to forget. I do see that as a kind of reversal because that in most African communities, older people are sharing, familiar setting with the child and grandchildren. Often, they are involved in all social activities. So, in a nutshell, they are of a paramount importance in our daily lives. But in some European or Western countries, maybe due to cultural rarities or social constraints, some people will let the old parents live in nursery. And then we have the impression that it's a kind of, there is a disintegration between them and relatives. So when the author says that he had the impression that in Europe or in Western world, people try to remember. Meanwhile, in Africa or in Burundi, people try to forget. It's actually that all people or relatives are being so close to daily lives. They are so involved that they are invading the space, so that now people are trying to forget them for just a while because they know that they're present. And there is a writer who is known as Amadou Kone who would say, who will say, deaths are not actually dead. Les morts ne sont pas morts. So now my perspective about forgetting is that envisioning chaotic experiences as a way of to remember is somehow good, but it is important to know about forgetting, because forgetting is not to forget forever, but is trying to understand what's happened and how do we go about avoiding mistake circumstances which bring about the chaotic experiences we've been experiencing. So it's the notion of forgetting for me is the kind of reconfiguration wherein we go back to the past and we try to apprehend what's happened and then try now to avoid though the same mistake that can lead to social problem. So the few words I was willing to say. as far as, I mean, the question of forgetting is concerned pertaining to Tracy's work. Thank you, Professor Naza.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Kwaku.
Yeah. Before tackling the issue of migration, let's come back. I won't jump on what he just said. No one chooses to forget. You don't choose to forget. No, I don't think so. It could be natural process, right? In the case of Africa, what is the recording technology? It is the memory. Once the one who's, let's say, memorized the past is gone, how can you get access to the content of his memory? That's the case. That is the problem, the key problem. So Africa has not chosen to forget its past. No, it is even, let's say, one of the, I'm going to say, not even one, the key point on which Amar's worked so far is working on that. Because Amar's writing is indissociable from retrieving Africa's past. But Amar does not build Africa's past, let's say, back to a pre-colonial Africa only. It goes further back in the past. Amar embraces Africa from what the mind and the memory could go back to. I mean, to ancient Egypt and even before ancient Egypt. So much so that the first writing of Amar from the start of, I'm going to say the beginning of the independence of African country to a twist in the 1990s up to now has been to explore or to attempt to explore Africa's past with a view to, let's say, teaching or unveiling values likely to be used for the building of African own perspective. Amar says the building of pyramids already. Amar says this as a distortion of Africa's trueness, because this means the erection of hierarchical power, which in the case of Amar has not been the case, was not the case at the beginning of the history of Africa, of Black Africa. For him, what prevailed was the communalistic way of doing things, not erecting people, kings, presidents, and whatever, I mean, sovereign over the masses of the people. So Amar wants us to go back, but to which past? Now that we've not recorded anything because we lacked, let's say, writing. That is the case. So we forget because we don't know how to, we don't have, let's say, a true writing system of our own, which could have had memorized, let's say, could have had write, memorize, stored, right, for future generations. This is the case. That is the case. And this is what, the same thing, the link with migration is that in the past, no African people will go outside of Africa. It doesn't mean that there's never been any migratory trend. No, migration is always, let's say, I mean, in the realm of the human being, as the theorists would say, they would say that, because anytime you change your home for another one, for one reason or another one, you can be, let's say, seen as a migrant. So this is the thing. Now, you put a question about, let's say, the first question that you put about migration. Migration is I mean, the way people say African migrant, and this is what prompts my writing, is, I'm going to say, so pejorative. African migrant over, let's say, in the words, there's the bulk of migrants in the world of Africa is said to be around 40.78 million people. And in the whole world, we have more than 304 million migrants in the world. What is 40? Which is only 15 to 17% of the whole bulk of migrants in the world. But whenever people talk of migration, they systematically, let's say, mean Black people. It is where there is, let's say, what we call intersectionality, where race, let's say, culture, and all those discrimination, they meet. It is true that most of the migrants who go out of Africa, unfortunately, are not skilled workers. But whose fault is it? It is what I'm going to try to show here. First, I'm going to say, the nearby are, let's say, responsible are the rulers of Africa. But I'm saying near. But those who are far back, those who are behind, those who've shaped their situation are accused the former imperialists and colonizers for pillaging Africa, for destroying Africa's, let's say, environment, when they look for ores everywhere, when they have a larger plantation on our own land than local people, where do you want those people to get their livelihood from? So I'm going to stop here. So I don't know if I've responded to your concern, but this is one of the points that I wanted to make.
Thank you very much. It's
You're
really a
welcome.
discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have endless times. Our time is very precarious also.
Right, sure. I'm sorry to have been so long.
Let's give Mr. Diawate first, and then if there is a few minutes left, then Mr. Toure, you can go again.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Nana. And also, I would like to thank again my master, Dr. Kwakujel. Thank you very much.
You're
It's a great job. Okay, right. Okay, Mr. Nana, your question take into account two aspects. The first one is directed to the scientific system, saying that any system in the world has its own limitation, even if in terms of indigenous knowledge, it has its own limitation. And we are living in a world of globalization, and the world is dynamic, it's not static. And we must try to put forward the different words of mediation and negotiation together. Because knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and scientific one together in the test. And to put forward a proof is the blending of different languages into the test. This is symbolizing how the world is viewed today. But in another side, the word is addresses to African people. Say that, okay, as a message say, kaiden retour au pays natal, kaiden retour au pays natal. To say that, do not forget what we are coming from. Yes, we don't forget where we are coming from. We are coming from Africa, but we must reinvent the different elements we are trying to show right now, because the world is dynamic, no static. This is the point I can try to do for the first. And I will try to end up with the question to my master, Dr. Kwakujel, about migration. And you, Professor, please, you talk about the youth in Americana who are excited to go outside.
Sure.
I would like to know, what is the rationale or what is the message beyond this one? Is that the political economic system in Africa fails, or what's happening really? This is my question to you.
Okay. Now I'm going to answer your question. I think, the writer herself has been critical enough. I expected a writer to, let's say, to write, to narrate. I mean, she's not the narrator, to narrate the story and to leave the rest to the critic. But she's been critical enough to deliver or to uncover the reason behind the moving of a young Nigerian and even skilled professional, right? And let's say academic staff to the United Kingdom or to the United States of America. The reason is simple, right? Popularizing, poverty. And let's say, what do you call this? Long-lasting strikes every time. So much so that students couldn't pursue the studies. All this due to the fact that, right, there couldn't be any understanding between intellectuals, the teaching staff and the rulers on the basis of their salaries. So in the novel, there is a long range, a wide range of around class stop, I'm going to say. Due to strikes anytime. So the parents, especially, those who have the bare minimum, ask their children to go abroad to pursue and complete the study there. But unfortunately, most of those who go, they go with a restricted student visa. What I mean by restricted, when they go there, they're not able to work. I'm stopping here.
Yeah.
Because I saw the hand of.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Mr. Toure.
Yeah. Before me, my colleague would like to say a few words. I will give you the floor before I talk. Okay, you go.
Okay, yes, Dr. Yu, I would just like to come back on what Dr. Jabakte just said. As far as the place of indigenous, let's say, culture is concerned, what's the place of indigenous culture in contemporary, let's say, world? I would like to say the very first is to accept the postulate that cultures are equal. And if we consider cultures as equal, civilizations as equal, and also human being equal, indigenous cultures, which appears to be minority cultures, are of extreme importance today. Because let's focus on our African traditions or African cultures. We used to have, let's say, a reverence to nature. We used to respect animals. We used to respect all living things, let's say fauna and flora included. If those precepts were accepted as universal values, today we are confronted to climate change, global warming, and other, let's say, organizations who are trying to defend biodiversity. But we all have those cultural richness in Africa and other minority cultures. So the thing to do is trying to promote indigenous cultures, trying to value minority cultures as equal to the mainstream. That's the first thing. And the second, naturally, I would like to talk about memory and what do we, let's say, choose to remember and what do we choose to forget. In Tracy Kidder's novel, let's say, if we want to adopt a deconstructionist approach, to remember is also to forget. Let's talk about the protagonist. When he was in the US, he was having nightmares of the genocide, scenes of the genocide. But after 12 years in the US, he decided to come back and confront is trauma, and face is ghost. So he undertaken a sort of pilgrimage. Going back to his medical university. This route, the path, helped him face and beat his ghost. Visiting his university, visiting the places of genocide helped him have a mental and psychological peace. So memory is at the same time forgetting. He forgot what he's been through, but not literally forgetting, but
not erasing, not erasing,
not erasing,
yes, but
rising
choosing to
above
put aside some.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that
but
was my
another
view.
question.
That were my view.
Sorry, but we don't have. It's you see, it's very interesting, but we don't have enough space to discuss here. Yeah, and another question would be, okay, how do we choose to forget? And but let's not address this question.
And we come to the end of time already.
Yes, we can have another time, and I really hope that maybe in Abidjan you will organize.
Let's keep in touch.
A symposium on these issues where we can discuss further. I really like to come to Abidjan and discuss further with on
That's
this
great.
topic.
Real pleasure.
Thank you very much for all of you. I guess all of you want to say a last word of I don't know, but thank you very much for.
Thank you very much.
Professor Toure, Dr. Yeo, Professor Kwaku, Dr. Diabate, thank you very much for your presentations, and see you on another panels. We have our closing event on Friday, and it will be preceded by a keynote, and then we'll discuss together and see how we can continue the discussions, because as we see, this was only like thought-provoking inputs that need to be deepened. So you are all invited.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening. Afternoon. See you online.
Everybody. Yes.
Thank you. Professor Kwaku, goodbye. Diabate, Professor Dionana, goodbye.
Okay,
bye to the high tech.
Professor,
goodbye to the high tech.
Yeah. Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the technical support.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.